Hi, I'm Jordan and I'm your Eat More dietitian. This week's video, I want to talk about hunger. I know it's something we have all experienced, but I want to take it and break it down a little bit. One of the things that I commonly hear from my clients is that they don't feel hungry, or they don't know when they're hungry versus when they're thirsty or when they're bored. So I wanted to take a little bit of time, break it down a little bit, talk about what hunger is, how to contextualize it, and I'll talk a little bit about. So let's start with the basics. I always like to make sure we are all starting from a similar place. Please keep in mind that this is not medical advice. This information is meant to be educational and informational only. Consult your physician before you make any major changes. Now, that out of the way, let's define hunger. So what is hunger? Hunger is the physiological and neuroendocrine-driven sensation that signals the body's need for energy. Just the same way your car turns a fuel light on when it gets low, hunger is your body's fuel light. Now, so what are the physical symptoms of hunger? They include that gurgling feeling in your midsection. They can include headaches, they can include lightheadedness, and it can also include nausea. Mental symptoms include irritability, fatigue, difficulty focusing and or thinking about food. Many of us are bad about getting hangry, me included. So when we talk about hunger, we're talking about that mental symptom of the irritability and the fatigue kind of joining forces to create a rather poor mood. While hunger and thirst are distinct needs, just the same way your car needs gas and oil at different times, they do share a number of similar signs and symptoms. That is why you may have heard the cue to drink water whenever you first feel hungry. While I don't think that's a bad idea, and definitely water is necessary, I do think it is a little bit of a slippery slope. Water is not a replacement for food. That advice is meant to just make sure that we are going to water first, because dehydration happens a lot faster than hunger does. Okay, so before I get any farther, I do want to make just a little side note. It is important to note that access to both food and education regarding food preparation is not universal. People have different access to grocery stores versus fast food, versus what kind of household they grew up in, who cooked, who taught them to cook, if they taught them to cook. So I think it's important to remember that while I am speaking very broadly, not everyone will have had the same experience and may not find this advice useful. Okay, so let's talk hormones involved in hunger. When we first get hungry, a hormone called ghrelin increases, signaling to our brain, our hypothalamus specifically, that we need fuel. We need something to make us go. Your hypothalamus then starts cueing your brain to start making you think about actively finding food. Then we get food. As we eat, our stomach stretches. It's supposed to. Hormones like leptin, insulin, and gut peptides all act to stop the hypothalamus from signaling you to eat food. GLP-1, interestingly enough, is a gut peptide released as you near satiety. It is naturally occurring. A lot of people that I work with are surprised by that information. Eventually you cease eating. This process is not instantaneous. General guidance says it takes 15 to 20 minutes to completely signal your brain that you have eaten enough. It's part of the reason that we encourage you to pace your meal and to eat a little bit more slowly. So that's kind of a big view of hunger. Hunger and satiety signals are integrated through a lot of dynamic feedback loops. The goal being to maintain energy balance, energy going out versus energy coming in. The hypothalamus is continuously monitoring peripheral signals, including those hormones that I mentioned, and it modulates our appetite accordingly, or it should. Dysregulation in these pathways, whether due to leptin resistance, whether due to insulin dysregulation, whether due to altered gut-brain signaling, contributes to metabolic disorders such as obesity, type 2 diabetes. We have to eat. We have to get energy in. I want to take a second to talk about GLP-1s. I did mention GLP-1. It is a naturally released gut peptide. So I want to talk about how it influences hunger to induce that weight loss. So synthetic GLP-1s, the ones that you put into your body as opposed to your body making it, they induce weight loss via appetite suppression, delayed gastric emptying, and enhanced insulin sensitivity with potential metabolic adaptations. Research is still young, specifically where the weight loss comes in. We have lots of research saying it's great for type 2 diabetes. We don't have as much research on long-term uses for weight loss. its ability to override regulatory mechanisms makes it effective in obesity management, distinguishing them from traditional caloric restriction strategies. With traditional caloric restriction, we don't lose the hunger, we don't lose the drive. Our body has adapted to a higher calorie intake, so you take that away, and especially if you take that away very quickly, our body is going to react strongly, and a lot of times see failure to utilize caloric restriction long term because our body's drive to just maintain the status quo is so strong. The way that GLP-1s do this is essentially putting more that our body already creates to cue our brain to think about food less, to have less of an appetite, and to delay gastric emptying, which is what it also does naturally, meaning that we feel full for a longer period of time. So that feedback loop is being influenced. Okay, so let's move on. We talked about GLP-1s. Let's get back to the hunger. There is a spectrum of hunger, and I like to use a scale of 1 to 10. I would like to credit research from Evelyn Tribble and Elise Reich, who are very big in the eating disorder world. That is my background. That is where a lot of my references come from. They wrote a book called Intuitive Eating. I will reference them a lot. I love a lot of their cues. I would like to give credit where it's due. Okay, so I'm gonna put it up over here. Scale of 1 to 10. 1 being too hungry. So this is gonna be weak, dizzy, shaky feeling. We've gone far too long without eating. 10 being too full, body is miserable. So full you feel sick, stomach pains. That is like 4 Thanksgivings in one day, right? I like to introduce this to people, and I don't tell them to adjust anything when we're first starting out. I just want them to start noticing. When you sit down to eat, where are you on this hunger scale? In 5 to 10 seconds to say, okay, scale of 1 to 10, how hungry am I right now? Before I eat this meal, before I even start, how hungry am I? Then once they start to get a little familiarity with this hunger scale, I would like them to start aiming for, I'm gonna find food in that 4 to 3 range. I want to have some hunger, maybe a growly stomach, maybe not, but I want to have some hunger. That's when I want to eat. If we get to hungry, that's okay, but ideally I want to eat when we're starting to feel hungry, okay? This is how we prevent some of the overeating. I want to stop eating between a 5 and a 6. So I know that's a very small range in that 10 list that I gave, but it should be. Our body's ultimate drive is to stay in homeostasis. It wants to stay in a very narrow range. Our body's happiest when our blood sugar is in a very narrow range, when our blood pressure is in a narrow range, right? Our body's natural inclination is to keep things within a fairly small range. That's where it functions best. We want to stay in that range. We want to get as close to that 3 to 5 each time we eat. I find that most people wait until they're at like the 2, so like the very hungry, grumpy range, to eat. Or they will ignore their hunger, which we'll talk about in a second, and then they'll go and eat until they're at like the 7, 8, 9 range later in the day, most often. That would be my goal, is to start noticing when you're starting to feel hungry and start seeking out food at that like 4 range. If we make it to a 3 before we actually get to food, that's okay. I don't want you to feel weak. I don't want you to feel dizzy. I don't want you to feel shaky. None of those things are fun. So how to approach this? Before we take a bite, wait 10 seconds, assess where am I at. Hopefully we're in that 3 to 4 range. During your meal, check in and ask yourself, where am I on this scale now? Take an extra 10 seconds while you're taking a drink of water. This doesn't have to be awkward. I'm not saying if you're at a meal with someone else and you're just like, hang on a second, I need 10 seconds. Well, that's not what I'm talking about. In the process of picking up a glass and taking a drink, I can assess, how hungry am I? How full am I? Should I start slowing down? We want to eat until we're about that 6. We want to be satisfied. We don't want to still be hungry. Ultimately, hunger is supposed to help us regulate energy intake and balance energy needs. Okay, so what happens if we don't follow these cues? Sometimes people don't eat when they're hungry. Sometimes life happened or we get a busy day at work. One-offs shouldn't have a huge detrimental effect. When we start ignoring our hunger cues over and over and over again, we get those repetitions in. It's kind of like an alarm clock. If you've ever snoozed your alarm a few too many times, eventually it stops going off. Same thing happens in your body. Your body is utilizing energy to cue you to find food and to remind you over that period of time to get food. And if you ignore it and we're not eating enough, it's going to reserve the energy. It's not going to continue signaling you for you to continue ignoring it. At some point, your body learns, it doesn't matter if I cue them, they're not going to eat. I'm going to save the energy and put it towards something we are going to do, like breathe. The other effect of this is it can actually contribute to decreasing metabolism. If we undereat for an extended period of time, our body's just going to adapt to that lower intake and start storing everything over that lower intake. It becomes impossible to create enough of a deficit for your body to trust it can let go of some of that adipose tissue because it's storing it for energy. Since you are not giving it energy, it is storing what you do give it. If we don't eat until 1 or 2 or 3 in the afternoon, we have burned energy from our last meal to this point. So if that's 2, 3 in the afternoon, we're talking about 14, 15 hours that our body has continued to burn energy, and we've just continued to create this energy deficit. We put out heat, we breathe, we do recovery processes. It's important to note that when we dysregulate the system, when we ignore these cues, and we're not feeding that fire, if you don't feed that fire, you create this big deficit, which means your brain's going to cue you to overeat at that next meal. That next meal, we've got to make up for this 14, 15 hour window that we've continued to burn energy and haven't put anything in the tank. So then we overeat, it stores what is excess for what it needs right now. So the system is now totally dysregulated. Now, that being said, can you survive this way? Absolutely. Can some people find a way to make this work for them? Sure. It's not the best way to handle that issue of dysregulation, right? To cure dysregulation, we have to create regulation. We have to normalize a process, a set of habits for your body to start relying on. It doesn't have to be 17 meals a day, but ideally we would spread it out throughout the course of the day while your body is burning energy and try to give your hunger the opportunity to help you regulate intake and energy balance. Consistency is going to be critical to long-term health changes. Anytime someone wants to implement a new dietary habit or structure, I always ask them, do you see yourself doing this long term? Because if we don't see ourselves doing this long term, what's the point of doing it temporarily? Because if we just go back to how things were, we're going to go back to the results that we had. It's important to decide for yourself. I'm not saying if you do it for 2 weeks, you have to do it forever. Give it a test run, but be willing to accept this may or may not work for me. So this went way longer than I intended it to. A couple of takeaway thoughts to give you as we wrap up this video. I'm sure you're all going to be ready for these, but I'm going to hit you with them anyways. 1, eat regularly throughout the day. Start eating something within an hour or 2 of waking up in the morning. It doesn't have to be right after you get out of bed. Some of us need a little time to acclimate to consciousness. That's fine. But an hour or 2 are waking up. Try to eat without distraction more often than not. Yes, some of us, we need to work at our desk. We need to have meals with friends, but try to avoid sitting in front of the television when you eat. Try to avoid scrolling on social media while you eat. Practice mindful eating, so that checking in that I was talking about before you eat and while you eat. Check in not just on your hunger, but check in, are you enjoying your meal? Can you smell your meal? Are you savoring your bites? Are you shoveling it in? Practice just being present in the situation that you're in while you eat your food. To ensure fullness, pause for 15 minutes. So when you think you're done with a meal, you've eaten whatever you pre-portioned for yourself, and you don't necessarily feel full, pause for 15 minutes. There's nothing that says you can't come back and eat more later, right? If you're hungry, I want you to eat. There's nothing inherently wrong with hunger, except that we don't trust it and we don't listen to it. Or we've trained ourselves not to, right? So if you're unsure if you're full or not, give it 15 minutes. Do that check-in again. Look at that scale of 1 to 10 and figure out, okay, where am I? If 15 minutes later you're in that happy place where mind says more, stomach says less, maybe we just need to be done. But take that little breather to just assess, is this gonna work for me? Am I still hungry? Last but certainly not least, I want you to enjoy your food. I know I mentioned earlier in this video, not everyone has a really good access to different types of food, different varieties. I think it's important to note that not all of us are going to have that access, but if you do, I would encourage you to start trying to find things that you enjoy, really enjoy, not just, it's just what I eat, but actually enjoy the process of eating, enjoy the flavor of, enjoy the smell of, get all those senses involved. Enjoying your food, feeling satisfied, those are contributing factors to that mindful eating practice that we're hopefully starting to work on. So this video has been about hunger overall, kind of what it is, how it works, how we'd like to approach it. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to share with me on other topics that you think might be helpful, please comment down below. Feel free to subscribe. I'm doing one video a week for now. I have some good ideas, but I'm always open to feedback. I will see you guys next time.